Hello and welcome back to the Bathurst Readers and Writers Festival, our live stream event for this evening. We have just had the pleasure of speaking to the gorgeous Tracy Sorensen, who I believe has been on Facebook replying to your questions and your comments. So thank you so much for joining us. If you've just arrived onto the live stream, I'm very happy now to welcome the gorgeous Alice Blackwood. Alice is, I'm going to read my paper because I've got my special glasses. Alice is an ecologist, an educator, a poet and musician. She lives and works on Wiradjuri country as well as Darug and Gundungurra country, She has twice been a finalist in the New South Wales Poetry Slam finals and has had work published in Cordite and Bathurst Poets Anthology in 2019. Alice is currently writing and devising her first full-length live performance called In Breath. So welcome. Alice is going to sing a song for us from her new work, In Breath, and it's called Autumn Song.
Today, there is more of the earth on the ground than there was on the ground yesterday. The soil draws itself back to itself, what it gave to the sky, now returning. The blood of the season rises scarlet in my veins as I hear the distant call to the gathering. The old oak tree makes itself mostly from air, but it holds us so firm we forget. And sometimes I feel like I'm decaying, like the leaves beneath my feet. Wish I knew what these trees were saying with their million golden poems on the street. Today, there is less of the sun on my skin than there was on my skin yesterday. The summer finally loosens her grip as the morning mist lingers longer. And sometimes I feel like I'm decaying, like the leaves beneath my feet. Wish I knew the spell for delay, but the future will not wait for an RSVP. Today, there are more of my days in the past than there were in the past yesterday. I am a story written in bone and blood, just a chapter in a long and winding journey. And sometimes I feel like I'm decaying, like the leaves beneath my feet. Seems like every risen thing is swaying, waiting for the Today, there is more of the earth on the ground than there was on the ground yesterday.
So beautiful. Thank you so much, Alice. It's actually such a shame you can't hear the applause because I'm sure everyone's applauding at home and Kylie's applauding. Thank you so much for joining us here in our live stream and coming out of lockdown to join us for the event.
Pleasure.
So I want to talk about, we're sort of having a creative conversation this evening about Alice's creative process around her new work in Breath, and we're also talking about what drove you and led you to this experience and this I guess the desire to create a full-length work. So I kind of want to wind back a little bit and talk about your background in environmental science and your link to activism and how it has that always been present in you as a person, and is there a time that you can recall perhaps when this started to ignite for you?
Yeah, well, connection to nature has always been something that really gives me so much energy and meaning in my life. And yeah, I've been really lucky to have a lot of experiences to really foster that throughout my life. And yeah, particularly going out into the bushwalking as a kid with my family. And the family story always has sort of gone that when I was little, bushwalks with me were very, very slow because I was fascinated by everything. I wanted to stop and look at every little thing. And I feel like I can still get into that mode, and that's a really sort of creative space for me still, just slowing down and using my senses and really noticing what's going on around me.
Oh, it's really interesting because part of that creative process really is about presencing and being able to have the discipline actually to sit and wait, you know, and almost wait with an openness to productivity as opposed to sit and procrastinate. So were you always drawn to writing as a form of creative expression, as a way to kind of explore that link to the environment, or is that something that emerged later?
I think I've always been drawn to writing or creating in some form. Definitely, yeah, always having creative urges, but that's taken different forms over my life. So, yeah, writing. I did write some classical music compositions as a teenager, and yeah, sort of had that classical music background, and yeah, always enjoyed sort of writing. Some of the clearer memories I have of sort of realising how powerful words could be is when I sort of wrote letters to people and realised that they could, yeah, that they could really move them in ways. I'm like, oh, that thing I wrote made that person have some tears in their eyes, or more so than writing particular poems for school or anything like that.
Yeah, so it was a form of communication that you started to kind of link into feeling, really.
Yeah.
Quite early on.
Yeah.
And so in terms of those sort of bushwalks and exploring, were there any experiences that you sort of took on yourself as a young adult or as an adult that I know that you did actually cycle across Australia, and I'm completely fascinated by it, because if someone says to me, do you want to go for a bike ride? I go, no. So I'd really love to know, unless it's of course in Paris or Amsterdam, and in which case I have done that. Well, maybe not Paris, but certainly Amsterdam. So can you talk to us about that wild adventure? Because it was a wild adventure.
Sure.
Can you tell us a little bit about that? Just because I'm fascinated how immersed you were in that experience of riding your bike across Australia.
So that was, gosh, about 10 years ago now. So it feels like kind of a long time ago, but it was a really formative experience for me, definitely. I just finished studying environmental science and felt like I'd been learning all about this beautiful country and the intricacies of how it works in lecture halls, but wanted to get out and really experience it with my body and get to know it in a different way. Yeah, it wasn't all the way across Australia. It was a good, oh gosh, I can't even remember, maybe 6,000 k's or something in all, which daunts me at the moment. I don't know Yeah.
Yeah,
But-
lockdown to 6,000 Ks, that's a big jump.
Yeah. But it's interesting, I was thinking about it because I know you've been interested in it, and I've been like, oh, that's not really relevant to what I'm doing now. But I remembered thinking about it today that I actually wrote a blog on that time called The Slow and the Curious. And that, yeah, like I didn't have a smartphone then or anything, so I'd spend like a few days carefully writing something about my experiences, and that was my way of sharing with the people in my life, and got some really great feedback from that. And that was maybe a spark of being like, oh, maybe I can do a bit more with this playing with words sort of thing. And also that the slow and the curious is still sort of part of my approach.
Yeah, because stylistically your poetry is, and if we just take Autumn Song as a case in point, it is the detail and the small things that you need to take time to look at that you're bringing to life in your work and in your words and particularly in the poetry as well, is these perspectives which are interior. And you're bringing to life the minutiae that we take for granted or perhaps don't even notice. And it reminds me of, we've just been talking to Tracy Sorensen, and we were talking about this creative life that she lives, and how there are threads that she's now able to identify, quite literally in her case, but moments and fragments of experience which has then led to the next thing and the next and the next, obviously not in a linear way necessarily. So this sort of idea of presencing, how has that come to life in your poetic life? So now that you've started writing poetry and in particular successfully, moving to a finalist in 2 slam poetry competitions, which are highly competitive, how has that that courage to take the written word off the page and into performance come to you? Because it's quite a contrast to Slow and Curious, right? You've got the work and then it's, you're front and centre then.
Yeah. Well, I started writing songs probably about 15 years ago, and just quietly sharing them with friends and at parties and that sort of thing, and slowly at open mics, and slowly building my confidence with that, and realising, that there was something in there for people that connected with them. And then, it's interesting. I don't really see my poetry and my songwriting as separate, but maybe the poetry, bringing that publicly, has come more recently. I for quite a while really had been writing little things down. Sometimes they'd turn into song lyrics, sometimes they wouldn't. But it was really when I moved back to Bathurst 3 years ago that I connected with the local Bathurst Poets group and first shared some poetry beyond just with my friends and family, and just the supportive local arts culture here has been such a beautiful sort of nurturing space for me.
Yeah, so the allies really help get the work out.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you about, because form doesn't really matter, as you say, it's poetry or it's song, it doesn't matter. You're writing a fragment and out it comes as it's going to come. So you've been working on really this for a really long time. There's this suite of expertise with words is really sort of gathering speed. Why do you want to do a full length work?
I'm really excited about the opportunity to create a whole container, create a space of my own. Like, I've loved performing in poetry slams and performing at open mic nights and that sort of thing, but actually being able to shape a whole work and really curate it and think about all the different elements, not just what songs and poems I'm going to do, but what space it's going to be in, and what people's experience are going to be in that space, and how that can be all sort of part of the art of it, is really exciting to me.
Yeah, it is really exciting, and because you've got so much material as well to work with. So one of the conversations that we had early on about in-breath was you had this desire to work with plants, and you wanted everybody in the audience to bring a plant to the play and or the performance, and which immediately attracted me. Immediately I was like, oh, okay, so what's the connection with plants and performance, and what's the connection with your background in ecology and environment and education? Can you speak to us a little bit about that impetus to disrupt the idea of separateness between ecology and humans?
Yeah, so that's a really big theme for me and something I'm really interested in. And yeah, sort of have been thinking about a lot over the past few years and reflecting on my own relationship with plants, because I've studied them from a scientific point of view. I'm a gardener. I weed them, I eat them, all that sort of thing. But also coming to learn about ideas of plant language and plant cognition, that there's some really exciting research coming out that plants can actually hear certain sounds and that sort of thing. So fascinated by that, and also I really believe we need to start sort of writing new stories as a society, and this idea of humans as being separate from nature is something that I think really needs examining and breaking down, that we're not separate. So yeah, just sort of being a bit playful for that. I love the idea of performing for people and their plants, or performing with plants.
Because people get, I mean, if you think about the sort of context of where we've been living and how we've been living, and we've had such a punishing 12 months, you know, and much longer obviously, but in particular as the drought crisis and the water crisis increased here, and then of course the bushfires, and so to think about the impact on the ecology, and people are sort of experiencing the devastation of these events much more acutely than ever before.
Yeah.
How are you using this work to express your own activism around our disconnection from nature and the environment and ecology?
Well, part of it for me is just processing all those big feelings, because I love this country and this world, and it can be totally overwhelming and fill me with despair sometimes. So part of it, and I think it's important to express that and work through that together, but also sort of remembering how much is still out there to fight for, and that we are really all connected, and just sort of remembering that spark of that little child discovering a shiny insect on the path, or that sort of thing. For me, sort of keeping that fire burning is really important, and partly my work is for myself to process these things, get them out, and refresh my energy. And if that can do the same for other people who I know, or you know, we all care about these huge challenges that we've been facing. Yeah.
There's a particular, I mean, I have been working with Alice to you know, talk through ideas around this beautiful new work, and there's a particular poem that every time I read, in fact there's more than one, let's face it, I'm often in tears, because I do find the way in which you're able to bring to life the little things, and one in particular was one that is on the website that Alice did, called the Bogon. Is it called the Bogon or the Bogon moth?
The Bogons.
It's just called the Bogons, and it's about Bogon moths, obviously. But it's so magical because it evokes the feeling and the wonder and of when you see the moths. And there's a really beautiful line at the end of it about a tiny grief, which sort of taps into this reminder that the moths aren't around like they used to be. So I think what I love about the work that you're creating is it's both subtle but also really, really bold. What are you hoping that audiences experience from In Breath? Can you talk to us about the themes that you're exploring in the work?
Yeah, so exploring, sort of, anchoring around the idea of the breath, and that being something that connects us all to each other, and also to the plants around us and this world that we're all living in. And there's also some trauma around that. If we think about the smoky, very scary summer we experienced. So part of it is exploring that, which made us all much more aware of this air that we're moving through all the time. But also, I guess one of the questions is how do we process these huge events together as a community, and also what would it mean to hold on to some idea of hope, or create some idea of hope.
Yeah, I mean, it's big, and it's actually really difficult to distill a work when you're exploring the themes that you're exploring, but I can tell you she's doing it. So one conversation, as you were talking about space, what kind of ideas are you having around where you'd like to stage the work?
Early on, when a friend asked me what I pictured for it, I was like, I'm not really sure, but I want there to be plants. So we're looking at options for, a space that can be surrounded by plants.
So sort of immersive or site-specific, where the audience are not separate.
Yeah.
So there's a real sort of continuation of this notion of embodiment. So if we hark back to what you were talking about in terms of when you went on the road and you needed to embody the experience of the work that you've studied around, Australian eucalypts and river systems and all of the education work that you're doing in your work in the Blue Mountains and other spaces, this sort of notion of embodiment feels like you're wanting to bring the audience into an embodied experience?
Yeah, definitely. And for me, that's the same question as are humans separate from nature? Is our mind separate from our body? Which, neither of those I think are separate. So it's also part of the same work for me of breaking down that sort of rational, emotional, mind-body divide. And that's something, I love about music and poetry, because it can sort of do that work in a way that just delivering a speech or writing an article.
It's kinesthetic. The felt space, the lived experience. It's sort of that phenomenological space where you're in the being of it. And there's actually quite a lot of writing around at the moment around the philosophy of performance and plants, and I mean, it's a real movement, isn't it? There's a real thing happening. I mean, do you imagine yourself taking your work beyond the performance space in which you end up doing it here?
Yeah, definitely. I'd love to, take it around the place when possible. Like one of my main motivators for it is to sort of connect with people and feel a part of that creative community and contributing to that. So when it's possible, I'm hoping to take it further afield for sure.
Yeah, great. And look, I wanted to ask you one other question, which is sort of a corny question, I do admit, but I'm always interested in the creative influences that help people in their devising processes and in the way in which they're constructing works. And it's not really about using comparisons or being derivative, but I'm really interested in who inspires your work. I'm a total bowerbird, so take different bits and pieces from everywhere, and I sort of struggle to pin myself down to being influenced by one particular genre. Sort of reflecting on this the last couple of days and realised that at least two of my songs I've written after reading a book. So, and one being Tracy Sorensen's fabulous The Lucky Galah. Oh, it's so wonderful, isn't it?
That one, and also just sort of really influenced by friends who are artists in the sort of folk music scene or DIY sort of scene. So creating that sort of small, intimate space, but also just being happy to be weirdos and own like their way of doing things. And
I mean, it's interesting. I think it's just so intrinsic in that process, in the process of creating, is to be a bowerbird, because you know, those influences, those books, those poems, those songs, those outfits, those whatever they are all grist for the mill to bring work to life.
Yeah.
Alice, thank you so much for coming on this very freezing cold night to talk to us. We would love to finish with one more song.
Yeah.
Could you intro the song for us?
Yeah, so this
Tell
song
us a bit about it.
Is called Always a Sunset, and I wrote it sort of for myself, as a message to myself in the times when I'm sort of stuck in a rut and like feeling like things aren't quite the way I want them to be and that I want them to change, but not feeling hopeful about that. So sort of a reminder of all the amazing things that are out there, like pelicans. How can you be sad if you think about pelicans?
Or sunsets.
Yes, indeed. And then I was playing this the other day and I was like, this feels like actually a really good song for this moment, even though I wrote it, before before this COVID-19 thing was even a blip on the horizon. But
well, I think that's the sense that I've got from a lot of the work that Alice has shared with me so far in the process of creating her work, this new work, is the universality of the themes that you're touching on. Is, you know, they're relevant for all kinds of things beyond what they began as. So it's a really exciting project, and I really am so much looking forward to seeing it come to life live, because it needs to be live, because we've got to feel her brilliance in the flesh. Thank you so much, Alice, and we'll finish our interview together with this beautiful song, Always a Sunset.
Thank you, Kate. There's always a sunset. There's always the moon. There's always a lyre bird learning a new tune. There's always a wave crashing on the shore. There's always a pelican with a pocket full of fish. There's always a candle waiting for a wish. There's always an ocean full of surprises. There's a world out there waiting while I drag myself from sleep. And there's a world beyond these walls, beyond the minutes and the meetings. Oh, help me to remember my hunger. There's always a feather. There's always a bone. There's always a lazy skin asleep upon a stone. There's always a desert glowing golden. There's a world out there waiting while I drag myself from weeping. There's a world beyond these walls, beyond the minutes and the meetings. Oh, help me to remember my wonder. There's always a scorpion. There's always an egg. There's always a silver gull standing on one leg. There's always a drops of dew on the spider web. There will never be an answer to satisfy us all. There will never be a reason to surrender to the fall. There will never be a language to recover what we've lost. Oh, and we'll never give up on our wonder. No, no, we'll never let go of our hunger.
Thank you so much.